Hello, everyone. I am Akashik the teacher, and I am here to break down the esoteric meanings of the holy text, mainly the Bible. This is not a religious channel, so I'm not here to preach or uh, enforce dogma or rituals or anything like that. This channel is purely dedicated to breaking down the esoteric meanings of the stories, parables, and scriptures in the Bible so that if you're on a spiritual path that you can take away the true meanings of these spiritual stories of consciousness that you can use in your everyday life today. I'm not worried about it, whether you believe in heaven or hell, or if you believe Jesus is coming back or anything like that. That's not what this channel is for. We are here purely to break down the esoteric meanings of the Jesus's teachings and the Old Testament stories and the parables and the scriptures so that we can get true meaning and use the teachings in today's world. So if that's something you're down with, continue to watch. And yeah, so today we are discussing Paul in Acts. And at this point, he's already converted and he's been preaching and teaching. And he got arrested. And so he's arrested by the Romans at this point in the story. And we are going to break down the esoteric meaning of his interaction with the Romans. So today we are reading out of Acts 25, 10 through 12. So that says, "Then said Paul, I stand at Caesar's judgment seat where I ought to be judged. To the Jews have I done no wrong, as thou very well knowest. For if I be an offender or have committed anything worthy of death, I refuse not to die. But if there be none of these things whereof these accuse me, no man may deliver me into them. I appeal unto Caesar." Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, "Hast thou appealed unto Caesar? Unto Caesar shalt thou go." Now, this story tells us of Paul, who actually once persecuted Christians. He was a Jewish man. However, he had all rights as a Roman citizen. So the story goes, one day he had a Christ awakening experience on the road traveling and instantly converted and became a Christian. Now, for context clarity on the esoteric meaning and breakdown of this story, we got to understand that the term Christian represents higher frequency, not religious dogmas or beliefs. It represents a person's level of frequency. So let that be clear. So anyway, Paul was once a lower frequency person. He was considered a heathen. He saw the light and became a higher frequency person, knowing that all power came from the infinite source, which is God. So Paul, in the esoteric context, represents you and I, people who are trying to walk the spiritual path, not the religious path. Those are two different walks. The spiritual path is an internal journey filled with meditation and self-observation, whereas the religious path is an external path where you're looking outwardly, mostly through prayer, dogmas, and rituals. But anyway, at this point in the story, Paul had been preaching and teaching Christ consciousness. He taught in several cities and countries all around. So he was kind of feeling himself. But we all know when your head gets too big, it's going to get popped. So Paul gets arrested for his Christ teachings. He was arrested by the Romans. Now, esoterically, the Romans represent your problems. In your spiritual walk, you will have plenty of Romans in your life. But how we deal with the Romans makes all the difference. So in this section of the story, Paul has come to a crossroad. He can stand still and let God, the infinite source, work in his life, or he can deal with it himself. Unfortunately for Paul, Paul chose to deal with the Romans in his own way, which is external. He chooses not to rely on the infinite, which is internal. He became arrogant and forgot that his faith should always reside in the infinite. And the ironic thing is that the Romans were going to let him go, but he overted to his low vibration self, and he sticks his chest out and says boldly to the Romans, his problems: I appeal to Caesar. Now, esoterically, Caesar represents the material world or the ego-driven world. So instead of having confidence in God, Paul chooses the material. The infinite will never take you from your freedom of choice. So once Paul appealed to Caesar, God would not intervene. He was on his own. So the Romans, his problems, responded to him by saying, if you appeal to Caesar, the material world, then to Caesar you will go. So from this story, it takes a lot of twists and turns, but eventually Paul sees the error in his thinking and begins to rely on the infinite. But if he would have trusted in God in the beginning, the Romans, his problems, would have gone away without struggling. This is the problem with taking matters in our own hands and not trusting consciousness, not trusting God. This is the esoteric meaning of the story. When you don't put God first, you leave yourself open to the world. The esoteric story of Paul points out a hard truth. One of the hardest things to do when you first start understanding spiritual law is to know where your help comes from. We all have been conditioned to only have faith in our five senses, what we can, see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, aka Caesar, the material ego realm. And because of this, we have lost the ability to hear and recognize that inner intuition, that inner voice that provides to us by our spiritual self. We basically have handed the keys to the car over to the ego and have lost all faith in our spirit self. So how do we do this? So ask yourself and be very honest. The last time you were in trouble or felt pressure or resistance, what was your first reaction? I'm pretty sure it was not to stand still. You had money problems, so you worked extra hours, got a second job. You had relationship problems, so you tried to manipulate, argue with your mate so that they could do what you wanted them to do. You have family problems, so instead of dealing with it, you go to the bar or you get high, you get drunk, whatever. You get the point I'm trying to make. The story in Acts about Paul is just like us. It teaches us that unless we stay on high alert, we can find ourselves appealing to Caesar. And Jesus echoed this story in Matthew 26, verses 52, where it says, then Jesus said unto him, put up again thy sword into this place, for all they that take the sword shall perish with the sword. He was trying to tell you, trust in the ego and you will die by the ego. What the world gives you, the world can take it away. But what you give yourself, what the spirit gives you, it can never be taken away. In most cases, the more time you have in your spiritual walk, the more you learn to put God first. And that is what happens at the end of the story with Paul. He eventually learns to put God first and goes on to help many people in their spiritual walk. Paul turned sincerely to God and got spiritual inspiration. However, if you insist on appealing to Caesar, then to Caesar you will go. And that road leads to hard lessons and heartbreak. So, the Bible, it's filled with these beautiful stories and parables and scriptures that deal with overcoming the world and becoming Christ consciousness. And, that's what these videos are all about, breaking down these holy texts and empowering our lives for today. So I look forward to sharing more stories and breakdowns of parables and breakdowns of the scripture so that we can all move forward in our spiritual journey, not our religious journey. This is not a religious channel. And if anybody has any scriptures that they don't quite understand, or parables, especially Jesus's parables, and or any stories in the Bible that you want to know the esoteric meaning of, yeah, leave in the description and I'll make a video about that. But I definitely will be making more videos like this so that you can get clarity and understanding. And yeah, and I will see you on the next video.